Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live. Talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynncullenshow@gmail.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
Well, hello there. Welcome to the program. It is the 14th of April, and just so you know, at the moment, there's a heck of a windstorm going on outside. I hope we don't get blown off the air. I've been looking forward to today because I have a guest for you who I have had on the show before. I believe that was when she wrote her first book called Shift. Theresa Brown is, or I believe I can now say was, a nurse, an oncology nurse, hospice nurse, and she's also a writer, and that is her chief profession now. She writes often for the New York Times. You perhaps have seen her on who knows what, a number of shows. She's been on Fresh Air. She wrote very recently an op-ed for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, which is very much about her most recent book, which is called Healing: When a Nurse Becomes a Patient. Theresa, it's a real pleasure to have you here.
Oh, thanks for having me back.
Oh,
I'm very happy to be here.
Well, I'm happy you're here too, in more ways than one. Gosh, wow. I have to tell you, I figured when I was read this book, before I opened it, I was thinking, my main feeling would be one of, just such sympathy for you. I have to admit that's not what my main feeling was. My main feeling was anger. It was anger. Because as somebody who has been a patient more times than I want to be in the so-called healthcare system here, surgeries and other frightening emergency room visits, I must say I have developed a true fear of going to a hospital. I used to, in my childhood, think of hospitals as safe places, and I now think of them as dangerous places. That's where I am. And so as I read your book, and that the fact that you, someone who spent so much of your adult life in the system, sort of feel the same way about what's happened to it as do I, a patient. It's a misnomer to call it health care, because caring just doesn't evidence itself unless on a one-on-one basis, right? From a one person in the system to a patient. But the system itself has nothing to do, it seems, with caring for you.
Yes, and put the care back in healthcare is a cliche, but it's a cliche that has arisen from thousands of people's experiences, like mine and yours.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's what impelled me to write the book, and what made me feel like I have to write this book, because I thought as a nurse, there are problems, right? I knew that. Of course I knew that. But I thought, well, we all care so much. We work so hard. It makes up for the problems. And then as a patient, I realized, no, that's not true. There just isn't so little compassion and awareness of what patients are actually going through. And it's wounding. So your body's getting fixed if you're lucky, right? That happens.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But then your soul, or whatever we want to call that feeling, thinking, human part of ourself, leaves still wounded. I mean, more wounded than you were when you went in sometimes.
Well, I think the patient is viewed absolutely like a car is viewed when it goes in for a service at a dealership. You get as much compassion as the car gets.
Right. And that's so interesting, because in Healing, I read about one breast biopsy I had where you you lie on a table that has a hole cut in it and your breast sticks through the hole and then they raise you up in the air. And I felt like a car at a garage. Sure. And, the point is then there's this breast sticking down and the idea is they can take the tissue sample they need and they don't have to cut you open. But no one says, hey, you're kind of going to feel like a car up there, but we're going to make sure to tell you everything that's going on. And we respect your dignity, even though you feel like a car,
Right.
Yeah.
But that is rare. That is rare that happens. That kind of caring, that kind of empathy of putting the person, whoever's doing it to you, of them being empathic. And we've spent the last 2 years calling all you healthcare workers heroes, and you, God knows, have been. But nurses and other medical folks in this awful system were burnt out before the pandemic.
Yes. And I am very worried about that. And we also had a projected labor shortage, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. I think it's a pretty large number of how many nurses every year the system was going to be short. And the problem with management is a lot of administrators don't see the value of nurses. And I think they feel like a nurse is a nurse is a nurse. One nurse leaves, there'll always be another nurse to take their place. Well, now there maybe isn't going to be a nurse to take that nurse's place. And I worry for our system. And I personally am really hoping for a reset after COVID, where out of necessity, management says, okay, we've got to start caring for our people, and we've got to give our people space to care for patients. Because I think most people in healthcare, they want to be caring. It's just all the pressures of the system has made that so hard.
Well, I think you're, I don't know. I think you're engaging in, delusional hopefulness there. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It just keeps getting worse because, let's get to your personal story before I just go off on a rant. I have to tell you, you really reignited my rage about our horrific healthcare system. So Theresa Brown was an oncologist nurse, which has to be tough. You're dealing with very, very sick and frightened people. And then you find out you have cancer. And I think anyone would think, well, you know what it's like, that this would be sort of, if anyone, it would be helpful, or maybe you know too much, so it'd be more scary. But what did the fact that you were on now the other side, did that give you any benefits as the patient?
I think in some ways I could read research articles and understand them, although as I write about, I never found an article that seemed written just for my group of patients. So then I would read things that scared me. The really weird thing was I forgot so much of what I knew about breast cancer. I never took care of breast cancer patients unless they were very, very sick, but I just forgot these really ordinary things like what is staging? What are tumor markers? And that was unsettling. But the really most important lesson that gets to your rage, which I love your rage, by the way, and thank you for calling me out for being overly idealistic, which I am.
Oh, God.
I
God
really
bless you.
But I knew from being a nurse that you got to go along to get along, what I call being the easy patient, right? So the same biopsy that I talked about, they wouldn't tell me, okay, now we're going to zap you to try to get a tissue sample. And now we're going to do that again. And wow, you've sat up there for a really long time, because they're having a hard time getting the sample that they needed. And when it was all done, they said how patient I had been, and that made me feel so good, which I think is pathetic now. But I realized there's a cost to that, to just pretending you're just a breast attached to a body that maybe has a brain in it somewhere, that needs to feel like a human being. So this idea that I'd seen as a nurse, you don't want to be the person who puts a wrench in the works. You don't want to slow things down. You just want to cooperate. It's not good for people to have that expectation of them when they're afraid and they're in an uncomfortable position and people are sticking needles in their body. And so I think that's a lot of the core of some of my anger. And then there's a moment when I speak up more and start saying, why does this have to be delayed? And I don't understand. And I realize I've become the quote unquote difficult patient, which I hate those labels, but people use them in healthcare all the time. And it was kind of embarrassing. And then I felt like, well, I don't think I have a choice. Like, I can either be passive or I can be difficult. And wow, what a lousy set of options.
Yeah. So who do you think gets the better care? The difficult patient or the passive patient?
In terms, if I'm going to be completely honest, I think often the passive patient. But there are times when being a quote unquote difficult patient and speaking up, that will get you something that maybe you wouldn't have gotten otherwise. It'll get people to be more careful. There are definite benefits to that. I don't want to say that there aren't, but imagine, I tell people, imagine healthcare as a big assembly line. Like you said, right? There's cars coming off the assembly line and, which is a terrible image, but people don't want someone who says, hey, stop the line. Like we hear you can do if you work for Toyota. Right. I think there's a problem here. Stop the line. The system is not set up for that. They just want everything to keep going. And in my worst moments, that's what I imagine, this assembly line. And along the way, there's a cash register going ka-ching, ka-ching.
Well, you say, but Theresa, you flat out say in the book, the present system values individuals, that's us, in terms of the money they bring in. That's the current system. You are nothing but a means for them to make money. That's the truth.
Yes. I think that's true. Yes.
It is true.
Yes.
And so if you, as a patient, if you're wondering why you feel like you've disappeared when you're in that system, that you're not even seen as a human. You don't feel human anymore. It is just it's as awful a system as this is a system that capitalism creates.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say. Yes. And it's
true. Yeah,
it's true.
I don't want people to say, oh, that's just socialized medicine. That's not what I'm talking about. Nobody is here saying you can't make money off of healthcare. You can't make enough money to pay your bills, keep your hospital running, right, et cetera. But it's this intense focus on pulling every last dime out of the system, gaming the system so that you get the maximum amount from Medicare or insurance companies that you can, denying people care to save money. I mean, I just went to get a prescription filled and they said, oh, they're saying you've gotten too many pills.
Wow. Who's saying? Okay, so who's saying that? That's the insurance or the middleman guys. Yeah, right?
Right. And this was for a very cheap generic medication. This was not a pill that costs $100 a day. It's probably like 4 cents a day or something. And this feeling of, literally in that case, every single penny is being watched to make sure I don't get 1 cent more than I need. And then the pharmacist took care of it, thank goodness. He didn't just say, I'm sorry, you have to leave without your medication.
You know, you as somebody who worked in the system, you were able, when you encountered some of this, you know, maddening lack of care and compassion, you were able to sometimes do an end run. You know, you knew people who knew people because, well, you've been working in the system. For the most of us, we don't. And you even said you felt like after your diagnosis, oh, you got cancer. You said it just felt like do it yourself healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
No, do it and I have felt that, and I'm sure. Kind of extrapolate on that. Do it yourself. What did you mean?
Yeah, well, they gave me a list of phone numbers for surgeons, but this was brought home to me right away because the radiologist was kind, the tech was wonderful. But they said you won't leave here without an appointment for a biopsy. Because in case people don't know, you have to have an actual sample of tissue for someone to look at to confirm a cancer diagnosis. A scan is never 100%, although she was pretty sure and she was right. But so, okay, I'm not going to leave without an appointment for a biopsy. That was comforting. I'm sitting in the chair, waiting to where you schedule it. There are streaks of tears down my face. And I'm sitting there, and no one came. And then finally someone else came by and said, oh, she leaves at 3. You just missed her. And I wanted to take that person and slam them against the wall. I felt this rage at such a violent level, very unusual for me, very unusual. And that was the start of it, of not only do I have to know who to call and remember to call, but no one even really cares whether I call or not. And much later, I wondered, what if I hadn't been me, right? What if I'd been someone who was shy or didn't want to face their diagnosis or really didn't have good insurance or didn't have insurance at all? And so I just never made that appointment. You know, we say people are quote unquote lost to follow up. Would I have been that person? You know, would I have been the person who just, oh, yeah, they thought I had breast cancer. Well, yeah, Nobody.
So you get the news, and then you're on your own. You all of a sudden have to have the smarts to pick the right surgeon. How the hell do you know? You know, you might, but how the hell does anyone else know? You have to figure it out from step to step to step. You say in the book, all I wanted after my diagnosis was for someone involved in treating my cancer to sit down with me, look me in the eye, and explain my diagnosis, discuss what my prognosis looked like, and clarify my likely course of treatment. That's it. Simple. Easy. Never happened.
Yeah.
That's an indictment.
And I still feel that. And as you said, I'm lucky. I have a friend who's a breast surgeon. I have a friend who's a nurse practitioner in oncology. You know, I knew other doctors from the work I had done. I knew people who could help me. And well, I suddenly feel so sad thinking of people who don't have those resources. I mean, I
most
was
of us
terrified,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I knew I had some help I could call on. I can't imagine feeling so alone like that and not having help. And you're given a list of phone numbers, and that's it.
Yeah, I have a listener who's asking this question. Hearing about the car lift analogy, when women have a breast procedure, and how dismissive the industry is about, nurses and other traditionally female jobs. This listener is wondering if the healthcare industry, even that it is an industry, is an outrage to me, is really male centric.
I'm sure there's truth to that, and historically that was absolutely true. I wonder if what's happened is we look at female and caring as being together. So,
Right.
Doctors are now split 50-50 in terms of men and women. Nurses are still mostly women. But I wonder if it's a suspicion of caring, and that has always dovetailed with primarily women being in positions. So nurses, women who work in daycare centers, teachers, all these professions that have to do with nurturing humans and that are so essential to having people who can lead productive, happy lives, right? Which is what we want. I feel like that is so devalued, and instead we reward people who aggressively make money or build companies or, run systems. And I'm not saying that's not important, but this valuing of aggression and sort of wanting to take over the world, it's a mistake.
Over human compassion. Yeah, that's things are out of whack. Compassion as a value is largely missing in the system that exists. There's no doubt about it. You go in the book. You talk a lot about things that drive me crazy, and I've never had cancer. I hate this pink crap thing. I hate when the fountain down at the point is pink. When I first saw that, I screamed out loud when I saw it. Football players wearing pink shoes, and I hate that. I don't know why, but I never have been able to articulate why. But it seems to me condescending in some way, and it's just off-putting to me. The other thing that's off-putting, and I see it every day in the obituaries because I'm an obituary fiend. So-and-so lost their courageous battle with cancer.
Oh, yes.
Yeah? All those losers in the obit page. Yeah.
Yeah.
You would agree with me. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You're right. The pink is condescending. It's infantilizing. It's, like I say in healing, I don't need this symbol that sort of is like, hey, I have breast cancer, but I'm still a woman. Gross. And I have yet to meet a woman with breast cancer who likes it. There may be swaths of women out there who like it, but I have never met someone who finds the pink anything but really upsetting. And I hate that. I hate that every October, the building in downtown Pittsburgh that changes color and it's pink. Yeah. And so I feel like every freaking October when I drive anywhere, I have to be reminded of my breast cancer because of this pink building, and then reminded of all the pink. And but to your other point about these war metaphors, I really disliked them when I was a nurse. He fought the good fight. There's no other illness we say that about. And
people don't. You don't say. I just want to. I want to stop there. There's no other illness we say that about. People don't say he lost his courageous battle against Parkinson's disease, or against diabetes, or against heart disease. We don't. Right. It's only cancer that you have to be a warrior with a positive attitude. By the way, all it does is burden an already terrified human being.
Yes. And then you have to say, you can't say, I'm scared and I have a disease. You have to say that you're on a journey. And people have said that to me, and I know they mean well, but the imagery of that to me is like, nobody goes on a journey with cancer. Like, I imagine I'm like on an airplane and there's like cancer in the seat next to me, right? Like,
that's right. Oh, are you guys having a nice little getaway? You and cancer?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right.
Like, I'm not on a journey. This is a disease. It's in my body, right? And then the whole that you have to say that, oh, it's a gift. Like, once you're healed, it's a gift. I learned so much from this. No one says that again about having a heart attack, about being in a terrible car accident.
No.
Like those people get to just feel bad.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. You know, media is complicit in this, and I think a lot of money gets made off of this nonsense. Always does. And people, and I know you would agree, people who are into this, who like do the Susan Komen, you know, race for the cure and all that kind of stuff, they are well-intentioned. They want to, you know, battle this disease. But, yeah, but it's taken us into, I think, bizarre territory that is unhelpful to people who have cancer.
Yes, and it is a burden. That is exactly the right word. And I don't know if it's because other people feel so uncomfortable. Is it that we find cancer more scary than any other disease? I mean, I talk about that some in healing. Is it just money? Is it all of those? I mean, even this book that came out a few years ago talking about cancer as the emperor of all maladies won the Pulitzer. When I was a nurse and I read that book, I really liked it. I thought, you know, it's very well done, very informative. As a patient, I felt like I don't want a disease that's called the emperor of all maladies.
Yeah, especially if you have to fight an emperor.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's a David and Goliath. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. There's your journey. You're fighting the emperor, and it's a gift that you get this challenge.
Isn't that wonderful? But and I sort of alluded to the fact that people will say, "Oh, well, you know, let's say, she has a bad outcome. Doesn't, you know, she's one of the people who ends up in the obit." And I have heard people say, you know, well, she was so, negative throughout the whole thing. She didn't have, you know, they say the most important thing you can have is a positive attitude. To visualize you're killing those cancer cells. And my God, talk about blaming the victim. Yes.
And Barbara Ehrenreich has really nailed that, the journalist. If people don't know her work, she's fabulous. But yeah, thank goodness no one said that to me, because I really might have punched them in the face. You know, and I took care of cancer patients. People had all kinds of attitudes. And I mean, this is the irony. It was either positive attitude, or sometimes we would say when somebody really beat the odds, well, they were too mean to die.
Yes, I've heard that.
Yeah, as if you can't look at it as we could just chart all these people's survival. Some people are going to fare much worse against their disease than anyone would have predicted. Some people are going to live so much longer than anyone would have thought possible based on what happens to the average person, right? It's just chance and
crapshoot.
Luck.
It's a crapshoot.
Exactly. And here, thinking about, here I am one day, I'm living my life. I go in for a follow-up mammogram, which I've done many, many times before. And I leave, and all of a sudden now I'm in this matrix of a war and a journey and a gift, and it's all wrapped up in a big pink ribbon. And why should that have to happen to me? I'm terrified that I have cancer.
Well, You say, I think toward the end of the book, that while American healthcare at one point was probably the best in the world, and that was in my lifetime, but I'm an old person, the best in the world. You say our healthcare is mediocre in many areas. And, you know, most Americans refuse to believe that because we always have to be the best. But they don't realize they pay more for not as good an outcome as people are getting in other parts of the world.
Yes. And when I give talks now, I try, no matter what I'm talking about, I try to bring in those two statistics because I really want people to know that.
What are the statistics? That
we pay almost twice as much as any other industrialized country, and our outcomes are worse in so many areas. And you know, especially maternal mortality.
Yeah,
is so bad. We are not even on a level with industrialized affluent countries with established healthcare systems. We are more in line in terms of mother and child care with countries that are really struggling financially and are struggling.
Developing.
Yeah.
That's where we are. Yeah. Well, then again, that shows how much we value women.
That's right. That's also true. Right.
So how many people, Theresa, go into an American hospital, assuming they're going to be healed by all the wonderful people in there, and they end up dead because of actual misair?
Right, and that's
how many?
Right. So medical mistakes are one of the leading causes of death in the United States.
You know, stop and think though of what we call that medical mistake. So there should be tombstones all over the place. It's have the name, the birth date, and the death date, and then it's a medical mistake. It would be mind blowing. So you get reduced to a mistake at the end.
Right. So that's a large number of, I was going to say, incidental deaths to go along with the point that you're making. And at the same time, the number of doctors who commit suicide is, you know, would fill one jumbo jet after another. It's just incredible how much misery is being generated by our healthcare system. You know, misery to patients who maybe leave with their bodies fixed, maybe don't because something happened that shouldn't have, and that's where being a difficult patient, I'm sorry to say, can be important. And then also misery of caregivers, because instead of being able to sit with patients and talk with them and think about them, we're having to put stuff on the computer so that someone who sits in a windowless room can get the bills put in on time and get reimbursed.
Well, everybody knows, and we by our own experience, that going to the doctor used to be very different than it is now. And going to the doctor now is the most impersonal. I mean, it's somebody sitting at a computer. If they even make eye contact, sometimes that's a win. One of the most memorable interviews I ever did happened about, maybe 30, 35 years ago, with the guy who invented the defibrillator, Dr. Bernard Lown. Dr. Bernard Lown, he just died last year. I think he was 100 years old. He won a Nobel Peace Prize as well. And he wrote a little book. And Theresa, I so recommend it to you. It's a tiny little book. It's called The Lost Art of Healing. And he wrote this easily 30, 35 years ago, because I was interviewing him about his book. And he was amazing. And he so understood where his profession was heading, and he was terrified. And this is a guy who was okay with he invented the defibrillator, so it's not like he was phobic about the technology that was coming into play so much. But he felt a doctor cannot do what a doctor does if they are not filled with compassion and caring for the human that is with them. He talked about touching, looking, and how much, and talking about not even what the problem was, of getting to know each patient and how much he then learned and was able to treat them better. This should be absolute, every medical student should have to read this book every year, and nobody does. Please look it up. The Lost Art. I'll send it to you. The Lost Art of Healing. Amazing.
No, I will look it up. And I actually did a project for there's a Lowndes Center in Boston that I did a project with them. So I know him.
Well, that's him. Yeah, he was
okay. Great. I'll look. Thank you.
There.
I'll look it up.
Just an amazing man, and he won the Peace Prize, the Nobel Peace Prize, for his. He was also a political activist for his activity against trying to ban nuclear weapons. He and a Russian doctor won it together that year.
Wow.
Yeah, an amazing human being.
Yeah. Well, and talk about caring on an international scale. Yeah. Right. You're saying let's see the person, and then let's see the world, and let's not blow it up.
Yeah. How about that? You think we could all get on board? Well, so you have since you're not a nurse anymore. Will you ever go? You're done, huh?
I miss it. I honestly really miss the work, but I think about going back, and honestly, I can't see it, even though I would love to, if I could find the workplace that I would need to be able to do the work in. So,
but it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist.
That feels terrible. Yeah, right. Yeah. Right.
It's just awful. You also left the neighborhood because you used to live just around the corner from me.
Yes.
And that in some ways was a result of, well, I know it was your kids growing up and moving out and the house getting too big, but so I don't know if we made clear that Theresa lives here in Pittsburgh. So you decamped and moved over to the north side.
Exactly. But
you like it?
I like it, but that was part of cancer too, wanting a different place, a different location, which does not mean that having cancer was a gift and that I decided I wanted to move. I feel like I always have to do, there can be after effects of an illness. And again, I could have had a terrible heart attack and said, I just want to try a different neighborhood, have a different house. And nobody would say, oh yeah, that was that gift from your heart attack, right? Why does every decision we make that's about looking out for ourselves after having cancer get sort of taken away from us and become something that gives this, it's almost like the disease is caring or something, which is wrong.
Which is really wrong. I recommend your book. I recommend all your work, and perhaps many of you did see Theresa's recent op-ed, which was in the Post-Gazette about this. She's a writer and a lecturer. You're all over the place, I know, lecturing. The book, again, I want people to get their hands on it, is Healing When a Nurse Becomes a Patient. And, it makes me think, my most recent medical foray, Theresa, was I had to have back surgery. And I never had done this. I really went shopping because I had so many bad outcomes. And I finally found a guy. And you know what one of the things, well, first of all, he was very human, but also he had surgery.
Oh.
And I have to tell you, I think it's like I think the best doctors and nurses are probably people who've been there, done that. That was the topper for me. I mean, it truly. And I once also, this is amazing to me, this was at Allegheny General, I once had a procedure done that was really very painful, but you had to be awake. And the person who put me through it was so wonderful. And she kept, sort of cheerleading me through and telling me I was doing fine, even though I was thinking, oh, my God, my God, my God. And then after it was over, she told me, or maybe she told me before, she had the procedure done herself, even though she didn't need it. Because do you believe that?
Wow.
She wanted to know what the people she was doing this to were experiencing. She had it done.
Wow.
How amazing. Yes, wow. How amazing.
I've thought about that, having nurses and doctors have to spend a day in the hospital, wear a gown that doesn't cover your rear end, right. get woken up at all hours.
Yeah.
I would
make
hope,
a better. Yeah.
Yes. Except for the most hardened person who you hope does not become a nurse or a doctor. They would see how just plain out dehumanizing that is. It really, really is.
Well, the book is worth a read. Believe me. Healing When a Nurse Becomes a Patient, Theresa Brown, available, I'm sure, all over the place, anywhere. And check out also your first book, Shift. I thought was just amazing, and that's
thank you.
That was a bestseller.
Yeah, and if I can make a plug for, I'm doing an event at City of Asylum on the north side this Monday at 7:00. People want to go to the website, and sign up. And if you get my book from City of Asylum, you'll get a signed copy. So, but you can also come to the event and get a signed copy there.
Well, that sounds wonderful. So that's this coming Monday at 7. Yeah.
Right. And you can go to their website. You can go to my website, theresabrownrn.com, and there's a link to their website. But it should be a good event. Should be fun.
Oh, I'm sure it will be. Hey, thank you so much. I'll look forward to reading your next edition of whatever. And I'm so happy that you're hale and hearty.
Thank you. And you're welcome. And thank you for your honesty and your anger. I really appreciate it. I do.
Well, thank you, Theresa. All my best. Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye. I want to say that speaking of anger, as you know, wasn't here. I actually didn't get back till this morning. Essentially, I got back after midnight last night when I was supposed to be back like 8 hours earlier. It was one of those wonderful travel experiences. So I'm a little. I hope you couldn't tell that I'm a little sleep deprived, but as you know, I think I was. I went to be with and hear this amazing, another winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. Mentioned Dr. Lown before. Leigh McBowee, Gbowee. And oh boy, even as I sat moldering at O'Hare Airport yesterday, I thought this trip was so worth it. And I just wanted to share some of what I got from from this amazing woman. Anger. She thinks we all, I mean, if you're not angry, you're not paying attention. And at one point she said, what did Adolf Hitler and Nelson Mandela have in common? And looked at her like, what? And all I could think of was they were both men. No, what she wanted was they were both angry men. Although you don't think of that, especially with Mandela, you don't think of him as angry. And Hitler, you don't think of him as angry, you just think of him as insane and vicious. But anger drove both of them. And how she talks about how anger is neither good nor bad. It is a thing, and it can be channeled. Hitler channeled it in one way. Nelson Mandela channeled it in another. And she, you don't have to end up doing what she did with her anger, which is bring peace to the nation of Liberia. You don't have to do that. He said you could write a letter. You have to do whatever you can do. And all of those things taken together move things forward. So she is a hopeful person, but only if we act. If we feel anger because we should, and then act. Not in anger, but because of our anger, and channel it in a positive, she would definitely say nonviolent direction, which is what she did. One of the things that's amazing about her is she won the Nobel with two other women, two other African women, all of whom had helped to bring peace to nations that men had totally screwed up and turned into killing fields. And she was a young woman. She was in her early 30s. She was a mother of many children. She had them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, I think the final tally is 8. She was a young mother and a social worker, and her nation was being ripped apart by civil war and the dictator Charles Taylor, who right now I believe is still moldering in prison somewhere because he was convicted of war crimes at The Hague, which is what we're hoping for Vladimir Putin. And this young woman, Lema Gabawi, young mother, is credited as being a big part taking that monster out. Nonviolently. She organized Christian mothers and women first, and then she thought, well, no, I got to get my Muslim sisters involved. She then got a Muslim partner, and they built this. At the time, it was an unprecedented interfaith coalition of pissed off women. They stood up to the guns and the terror of Charles Taylor. And they took him down. I was reading, oh, by the way, if you want to know more, I mean, there's an award-winning documentary that was done about her very soon after she did this. So this documentary is a bit old, but it's called, God, why am I? Pray the Devil Back to Hell. It's a 2008 documentary film. I also want to add that after these women knocked him out, Charles Taylor, who, by the way, The Hague said when sentencing him that he had aided and abetted some of the most heinous and brutal crimes in recorded human history. You know, and to be sitting there next to this woman who is funny and so filled with life. And here's another thing she said. There was someone, when she gave her lecture, a woman stood up and said, "I'm here with my children. And I wonder if you could give them some advice." And wow, she comes to the very lip of the stage and looks at these kids and says, "What are your names?" Wants to know the names. I couldn't understand what the names were, but she seemed to get it. And she then addressed these children. And I cannot tell you the power of this woman's capacity to orate extemporaneously. Just, you can see, some people are just made to be leaders of extraordinary power. And this is such a woman. And this woman, wonderful woman, says to the kids, she said, "Wait a minute, I got to take my shoes off." She had these little black heels on, and she knocks the shoes off, and she's in her bare feet. And she says, "Do you ever walk on your tippy toes?" And she starts tiptoeing across the stage. And the kids are, "Yeah, sure. And she said, "Sure. And you know what's neat about walking on your tiptoes? No one knows you were there. You don't leave your footprint." And I thought, is she going to tell him, to be sort of undercover and walk around on tiptoes? Of course not. What she ended up telling them is, don't walk on tiptoes. You walk on your feet firmly. You leave your footprints in your walk through life. And you walk a straight path, and others can then follow in your footsteps. No one can follow in your footsteps if you don't leave them. And I can't imagine everything she said had such an extraordinary impact. The speaking just to those children. Wow. I should, she's now, so she won the Nobel, in 2011. She took down Charles Taylor when she was in her early 30s. And now she's only 50 years old. I could be her mother. And she now has a peace foundation in, I guess it's in Liberia. During the pandemic, she was in Ghana. She is all over. She told me, I said, you must be so exhausted, because she got an airline, problem on the way to Green Bay, and ended up stuck in the Detroit airport. And I said, you must be so exhausted. And she said, well, no, you could tell. There's no exhausting this one. And she said, I've been, she said, on 4 continents in the last 10 days. What? What, you 4? Yep. She says, I've been in Asia, Africa, Europe, North America. So gee whiz. I also asked her, and I have to tell you this story because it's such a cute story. I said, did you have any sense that you might win a Nobel Peace Prize? She said, no. I said, well, the day that you won it, how'd you find out? Do they call you, right? They call you? And she said, well, yes, I think they do usually call you. She said, but I wasn't there. She said, so I didn't get the call. She said, I was on a red-eye flight from San Francisco to New York City. And when the plane landed, took her phone out, took it off airplane mode, and she sees that there's all these, messages and texts, all over her phone. And one was from Abigail Disney, who was the woman who did the documentary. And all it said was, Nobel, 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 Nobel. And she looked around and they were saying, congratulations, Nobel, Nobel. And she said, I'm looking at this and I say, my God, she says to the guy who's sitting next to her, I just won the Nobel Peace Prize. And I said, he must have looked at you like you were nuts. And she said, yes, exactly. That's what he did. But the guy who was seated right in front heard me too. And he turned around and he had already looked, he had seen her picture was all over. And he said, my God, you did win the Nobel Peace Prize. Milton tells me, not sure how long this will be available, but the film Pray the Devil Back to Hell is streaming free on Vimeo, Vimeo. If you go to Vimeo.com, I guess we'll put this link up. Okay? Evan, I'll send you the link. We'll put it up. It's only about an hour or 15 minutes, but it'd be a way for you to spend some time with this astonishing, wonderful woman, Lema Gabawi. Wow. Just wow. Can also maybe put up a picture of my mom and her. They got along really, really well. My mom will be 100 in 3 months, and Howie, who's 50, so half my mother's age, and it's a cute picture. Not a great picture of either of them, but it's just something wonderful. Anyway, so that's it, I guess. And thank God, I was really fearful I wasn't going to make it back to do the show today, but boy, that was a trip and a airport nightmare worth having. So thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed Theresa Brown, and I will return on Monday with who knows what. Be safe. Bye.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Thursday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper or its advertisers.